Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, January 17th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about the 2024 GOP primary and why I believe, genuinely, that the 2024 primary will be over in just around a month. By March, I believe that Donald Trump will be declared the winner of the 2024 Republican primary after a bunch of momentous victories across a number of Super Tuesday states after victories in South Carolina, Nevada, and New Hampshire. And most recently, a victory that Donald Trump, I'm sure, is very proud of is the Iowa caucus results that shows him with an outright majority in the GOP caucus. Now, the reason why that is so significant is because going into this race, there were a number of candidates, many of which had at some points in time, strong showings in the Iowa caucus preliminary polling data. Now, as we've gotten closer to this caucus over the past 6 months, Donald Trump has reclaimed the very demanding and commanding lead that he has had over the Iowa caucus and led into the election with now 51% of the vote, with Ron DeSantis in a distant second at 21% and Nikki Haley at 19%. Now, together, Donald Trump has 51% of the vote, but I would also couple in Vivek Ramaswamy, who recently dropped out and endorsed Donald Trump in the 2024 primary. In many people's eyes, Vivek Ramaswamy was Donald Trump, but more extreme, Donald Trump, but better to some voters, and so they supported him in the caucus. But in nearly 90% of instances, when asked, who would you support in your second choice, they went with Donald Trump. And so I would like to combine these two to sort of exemplify the true power and strength of the Trump campaign here. 51% on its own might indicate a close race, but again, the remainder of the vote drops down to 21% for the next candidate. And together, Vivek Ramaswamy and Donald Trump would get around 59% of the vote across the Iowa caucus, which means that he's already at 59%, with Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and their combined vote share at around 42%. And so I would say that looking at these metrics, you already find that Donald Trump has a very strong lead here, but even in a head-to-head matchup, based on the support that he would have, he would get around a 20-point victory over his opponents. And so for me, I take away from that Donald Trump has made a very, very strong group of support, whether that's combined with Ramaswamy or not. Regardless, if you take him out of the equation and add it to the DeSantis and Haley total, Donald Trump still wins Iowa. And so looking at where we have future elections coming up in the states of New Hampshire, in the states of South Carolina, you start to understand more and more why Donald Trump is on the pathway to victory. Because in our delegate tracker, there are a number of races set to occur. First will be the Nevada Republican caucus. The reason why I ignore the Nevada primary here is because right now, the Republican Party said that they will not be taking into consideration how the primary goes in order to determine delegate results. And so instead, they will be opting for the Nevada Republican caucus. Now, it's a bit confusing. Believe me, I know. And the voters there know too. It's very confusing. And so it actually confused some candidates to a point where Nikki Haley opted to vote or run in the state-run primary versus DeSantis and Trump, who opted to run in the party-run caucus. And so it's very, very confusing. I understand if any of you guys are confused, but essentially the Democratic delegation announced back in 2021 that they would be shifting all caucuses to primaries after the Iowa caucus was far from, without issues in 2020. The Republican Party said, absolutely not. You are not going to dictate how we are going to go. The Nevada law said, well, we're not going to give you any funding or any support. So the GOP caucus is ran by the party. The Nevada primary is ran by the state. Obviously, it's very confusing, but the Republican Party said we will not take into account any of the primary results for the GOP allocation, and so it will just be the caucus. Good news for Trump, because it means it's a head-to-head race between him and DeSantis. I briefly, didn't even talk about Nevada, New Hampshire primary. We know that's going to happen. We'll talk about that a little bit more in depth, but then comes up South Carolina, then comes up Michigan, and then we're at the end of February. And so I already told you that we're at this point where, you are going to see that these early races are going to build out the Trump campaign. Our prediction in my most recent video where I talked about the state of Iowa, I had Donald Trump getting 53% in the Iowa caucus. What did he end up getting? Around 51%. I then said DeSantis would come in second place at around 19%, Haley would come in third around 16%, Ramaswamy would get 6%, and Chris Christie would get 4%. Christie dropped out, slight movement. DeSantis up to 21, Haley up to 18, and then Ramaswamy at 8. And so I stand by my numbers because I think that I did a good job, at least I'm personally, tooting my own horn here, but I think I did a good job at predicting Iowa, and I think that we can use this data that I used from my most recent prediction, even with these dropouts, to expand over into New Hampshire, then over into Michigan, over into Nevada, and so that's just going to be something that we take a little bit of time, and South Carolina, of course, take some time talking about, and why that will shape up to be the exact reason why this GOP primary will be practically over in the month of March. And so moving over to New Hampshire, Donald Trump now, in the most recent numbers, and my new updated prediction here, is expected to get around 50% of the vote in this state. I could imagine it bumping up to maybe 52, 54%, but the takeaway here is that he's doing quite well. I think DeSantis is a little undervalued. He's polling right now around 5%. I think he's going to get a little bit closer to 10. And I wouldn't be shocked if Nikki Haley got around 41% of the vote in New Hampshire. The voters here do very much like Nikki Haley, but Donald Trump absolutely is coming into this with a lot of support from the state of Iowa that will hand him this very strong victory in this state, that one that he arguably had a much closer result back in 2016. And so New Hampshire goes there, and then our delegate count adds up. But heading over to the state of Nevada, like I said, because of the way this caucus system is set up, I have no hope for Ron DeSantis that he will have some upset victory in Nevada. Right now, the polls seem to indicate that Donald Trump gets around 60% of the vote here. In a head-to-head race, he's getting around 76% of the vote. When Nikki Haley voters have to vote away from them with Ramaswamy endorsing him, with Christie out of the equation, so many reasons to believe that without Haley in the race, Donald Trump does quite well. And another reason why I believe he would get around 76% of the vote. Then with that, you head over to the state of South Carolina, where I think that Nikki Haley would come in second place. But the way that the primary system is set up, if you win the entire state, you get around roughly 50% or around 55% of the state's delegation. It's a winner-take-all situation for this 55%. Then you move down to congressional district. Previously, I thought that Nikki Haley would do well in 1 or 2 congressional districts, similar to how she was able to win an individual primary or caucus county in the state of Iowa. I thought maybe because it was her home state that she could do well in in South Carolina. But I no longer think that is the case. I think after a lackluster performance in Iowa and what would be a loss to New Hampshire and then a defeat in Nevada, I do believe that South Carolina, as of right now, would go to Donald Trump in every congressional district and across the state, and voila, Donald Trump wins the entire state's delegation. And so now we're at a pause. And so I think that we could, maybe include the Virgin Islands, which is expected to vote overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. You're going to get around 100% of the delegates there based on delegate allocation. So now you're around 110 delegates for Donald Trump. Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley tied at 17. Vivek Ramaswamy at 3. Everybody else at 0. And so with everybody else at 0, actually, we can just save ourselves a little bit of time. Let's do some options here, or the candidates here, and just go ahead and delete some of them, because I think, we'd be saving ourselves time and saving ourselves clutter on the screen. Regardless, though, you aren't going to see any of these other candidates getting any more support. So it's 17, 17, 3, and then 110 for Donald Trump. And so already you're starting to think, okay, with all of these delegates counted, clearly Donald Trump is the favorite. But it actually gets a lot worse for the remainder of these candidates. Because for right now, Donald Trump being at 110 means, you're getting him around 147 total delegates, and he receives around 74% of the total vote here. And so that's a good place to be. But like I said, we have other states to move forward too. For instance, the state of Michigan, which has a very weird primary dynamic going on. A similar law happened in the state of Nevada. They're holding a primary, and then they're holding another, I believe, convention or caucus. Regardless, around a portion of the delegates will be allocated here. But Donald Trump is expected to do quite well in this multi-part race, which means that for a while, he's going to maintain a significant lead when it comes down to a lot of the delegates here. Now, of course, a little bit later in the primary season, we will see that Michigan actually have their state convention on March 2nd, in which I think you would actually see Donald Trump getting a bigger portion of the delegate share there, and maybe some vote splitting between Ron DeSantis and, Nikki Haley. I think that's where we roughly end up at. But of course, Donald Trump's lead begins to get even higher. And so at this point, I think this is when you would see a huge reckoning for a lot of the top contenders. Right now, Ron DeSantis is putting all of his energy in the state of New Hampshire. You are seeing that Nikki Haley is completely abdicating from the state of Nevada, doesn't even want to contest it, which is why she's in the primary. I think maybe it was just a mistake on the campaign side, but clearly she's not focused on this state. And I think Iowa and New Hampshire coming up around the corner, if Nikki Haley doesn't win New Hampshire, she's done for, right? I think with all of this reallocation of time and reallocation of resources and energy resulting in absolutely nothing for these top contenders, will tell them that this primary stint is coming to a close. I think that after Iowa, we really got an eye-opening result here that indicates that Donald Trump is this unstoppable force that maybe in some other reality they were able to prevent him from reaching 50% in Iowa, that Nikki Haley was able to get a strong second place showing. But by the time we reach New Hampshire, if she doesn't win there, which she is not expected to, she will drop out of the race. At least I think so, right? I think she's at a point where if she doesn't do well in New Hampshire, she will hold out, forget Nevada. She's not winning there. She can't win there. She cannot get a single delegate from the state. She'll head over to South Carolina. She'll try to focus as much as she can, just as Ron DeSantis is, then lose to Donald Trump the same way Jeb Bush did back in 2016, and then maybe hold out to Super Tuesday. But in the very early time of Super Tuesday, guess what happens? On Super Tuesday, there are a number of states, Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, California, that's a big one, Colorado, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, and Virginia. And while there aren't enough delegates here to give Donald Trump the outright victory just on Super Tuesday alone, it will be a done deal. I do not imagine that DeSantis and Haley will want to string along their campaigns only to continue to lose and lose and lose. And they know it is in the best interest of the Republican Party to focus more on the general election now rather than later. But obviously, this is not the place that they thought they were going to be when they announced their presidential bids. Ron DeSantis, who came in at a very high note, Nikki Haley, who came in with practically nothing and has made a name for herself and is now second place nationwide, I think they had a lot more higher hopes for what they could have achieved, for what they could have done, but ultimately, it ended up with barely anything for their campaigns. I think while this may be a strategy that sets them up for 2028, it isn't going to work this primary season. And let's take a look at some of the remaining states to sort of build out why, in March, this becomes a done deal, and there simply is no mathematical pathway forward. Regardless of who ends up trying to stay in the race, at some point, the primary will be over, right? And so we start off in the state of Idaho, which has a March 2nd primary. The way that it is set up there, Donald Trump is expected to win every single district and every single amount of delegates there. Then we have the state of Missouri, which is expected to go to Donald Trump in totality as well. Then you have Washington, D.C., which has, again, a similar type of situation to South Carolina, where it's going to be practically winner take all in terms of how we treat it. Missouri goes to Donald Trump, D.C. goes as well, Idaho goes as well. And then where you are is 258 delegates for Donald Trump, 23 to 3, right? And so then you move over to Super Tuesday. And again, this is where the math gets tricky, because it means that after Super Tuesday, based on my most recent predictions, and I will go ahead and allocate them accordingly, because I think it's best to visualize this rather than just to, briefly talk about them. I think that you are going to see exactly how the Republican Party will soon come to understand that there is no stopping him, right? I think Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis are still sold on this pipe dream that South Carolina and New Hampshire are going to give them some hope. I think Ron DeSantis was reaffirmed in his second place victory in Iowa, but in reality, it's simply going to be over quite soon, right? This is not the situation that the Republicans thought they were getting themselves into, but it's the reality of where we are today. So Colorado, we're going to characterize Ron DeSantis. We're going to give roughly the same amount of delegate support there. State of Maine, Massachusetts, winner take all. Donald Trump does well there, or winner take all with delegate systems coming down to congressional districts, but essentially winner take all. You see it happening in Minnesota, victory after victory after victory. North Carolina, which is proportional. Trump is expected to get 70% of the vote there. Nikki Haley will probably get around maybe 20%. DeSantis around 10%. Maybe I could see it even narrower or flipping, because DeSantis has been doing slightly better than expectations, but that's all to say it's a race for second, not a race for first. Donald Trump wins all of the delegates in the state of Oklahoma. The interesting thing there, though, is around 69% of all the endorsements out of Oklahoma, including the governor, have gone to Ron DeSantis. He has no shot of winning the state of Oklahoma. Utah or Texas, in fact, Donald Trump is expected to win all of the delegates there. Utah, Donald Trump will probably get a little bit better than I think what we were expecting. I think we expected Ron DeSantis to come within a very strong showing. I think he will still get that, but not to the extent that he needs. The state of Virginia goes to Donald Trump with a strong amount of support, but it is a proportional state, so we will allocate accordingly. And so there we are. Let's go ahead and finish this one. And then we are, I believe we've wrapped up all of our states. Vermont is the only one. Donald Trump expected to do quite well there. Nikki Haley doing a little bit better, and then Ron DeSantis coming in third. And so here we are, 1,295 delegates left, with obviously a huge chunk allocated and a huge map of blue, which coincidentally is not, the same blue as the Democratic Party, but recognizes that this is the Donald Trump color. And so 1,021 delegates for Donald Trump, Nikki Haley at 75, Ron DeSantis at 73. This is what we're looking at. By mid-March, this is the primary map if things don't get better for Donald Trump, which it looks like they very well might, right? I think for a while it was looking like Donald Trump might actually have a competitive primary in New Hampshire. That is no longer the case following Iowa. This is what, our primary map is showing is expected to be in around 2 months from today, and around a month actually from today, right? You're a month and a half. You are going to see Donald Trump trounce everybody else in every single competitive race. Donald Trump is in a very good point going into Super Tuesday. And so I think after Super Tuesday, there is no pathway forward for any Republican besides Donald Trump. And it will force them, whether they like it or not, even if they stay up until when he clinches the nomination, to drop out of the race. Because right now, Donald Trump has such a demanding lead, and the way the primary system is set up is that it isn't conducive for a competitive primary if one candidate is narrowly over the 50% mark. It isn't conducive for a competitive primary if one candidate even has a strong plurality amount of support, like you see in New Hampshire, for instance, where Donald Trump will probably win by a plurality, but maybe a majority, depending on where he is. The point is, Donald Trump wins this nomination, and it's not even close. I think we have seen a hyper-sensationalized, media frenzy around the primary season, and even me, partaking in that, fueling some ideas that the primary might be more competitive. And I think that's because I watch things from a horse race lens, which I think the mainstream media does as well. But I think looking at it from the high-level lens, there will be much less frequent videos about the GOP primary from my end, and I think we will see a lot less coverage of it from the mainstream media. And that's because this isn't a competitive race anymore, and it really wasn't for a long period of time. There was that small blip over the past month where we thought maybe Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis could be giving Donald Trump a run for his money in some of these early states. But as the Iowa caucus shows, and as we will see likely in the states of New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, and Michigan by the end of this month or the upcoming month, is that Donald Trump is easily on the pathway to victory, and that there is no reality in which he loses this nomination, and that right now, today, he stands at the strongest point practically ever in this primary process, and it is only going to increase. And so moving forward, all eyes on these early states, all eyes on the dropping out from Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley as they fire staffers, reshift funding, pull out of individual states, and go as long as they can until they no longer have any support or any backing in terms of volunteers, fundraising, right? Things along those lines. And I think that's when they will really recognize that by the end of this upcoming month, going straight into March, there is nobody else besides Donald Trump who can win this nomination, and they will come to terms with that, and thus they will drop out. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below, subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.